Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this next session of OER 2022. I'm delighted to be joined by Vivian Wladimirsky, who is joining us from the GoGen network today. And Vivian's going to be talking about investigating the use of OER and OEPs by Brazilian public basic education teachers during the COVID-19 pandemic. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Vivian. There will be a 5-minute question and answer session at the end of this, so please add any questions you have for Vivian into the chat. Welcome, Vivian.
Well, thanks, Caroline, for that quick introduction. I'm going to be skipping to the slide, so this is what I'm going to be presenting to you today. Just mentioning that this study has been funded by the GoGen network. I'm a GoGen fellow. So basically, what I'll be talking about here in this presentation today, I'm going to be addressing the goals and outcomes of the study, process and methodology, which are the online interview questions and population demographics. And I'll be showing you the preliminary findings. This is all phase 1. What I will not be addressing, but I'll be talking about maybe next year or at the end of the year, maybe at OER Global, whenever they're ready, validation of preliminary findings and the frameworks or guidelines based on data collected, which is the final phase of this study. So, as I mentioned before, I was funded by the Global OER Graduate Network. I was given a GoGen fellowship at the beginning of this year. The criteria for inclusion in this study is that the participant be a K-12 public school teacher and possess knowledge of OER beforehand. The objectives of this study are to better understand the challenges faced by K-12 teachers, Brazilian K-12 teachers during emergency remote teaching. So I'll be talking about emergency remote teaching. To assess if teachers use OER and OEPs during emergency remote teachings. To incorporate perspectives and experience of teachers during this period of crisis. And finally, the final outcome of this study will be to develop a framework or guidelines to catalyze a better path for the future. So basically, I undertook 60-minute interviews with 6 Brazilian basic education public school teachers. I initially recruited 15 teachers, however, only 6 teachers ended up participating in this phase. Categorization of the data was done, and coding was undertaken using NVivo, and we're disseminating. I've already posted the blog of these preliminary results. Now I'm disseminating to this conference, and I'll be posting other blogs and other publications to come in the near future. So just for you to have an idea with the online interview questions, they're basically focused on gathering demographic data. I'll be showing you some of that. Technology used during this period, instructional material and pedagogical practices used to deliver ERT, main obstacles faced, how student engagement and learning was assessed, use of OER, use of OEPs, plan to use OER and OEPs in face-to-face classes, and lessons learned. So as you can see, I didn't only focus on use of OER, use of OEPs, because I wanted to get like a bigger picture of what really happened during this period. So you can see here the population demographics of basically 6 participants. And most of them are from the southern region of Brazil. And the southern region of Brazil has a higher growth development index than, for example, the north and the northeastern part. Most of the teachers are elementary, and you have one here is high school, and they taught different subjects, which was really interesting. So I had Portuguese literature and foreign languages. Then I had a teacher, a participant from the north, who teaches literacy to childhood education. That was really interesting. Most teachers have a master's degree, except for one here who had a bachelor's degree. And they had varying experiences and knowledges with ERT. So this cohort was interesting because we have at least one, two, three teachers out of six, okay, so it means 50%, did have prior experience using ICTs or technology for education. The other three had no experience at all, okay? And then I also wanted to know who participant resorted to help for ERT. So the ones who already had experience did not need to resort to anybody, and the ones who did not have any experiences basically learned on their own. Okay. So technologies that the participants used for ERT, well, they use in Brazil, WhatsApp is very big, so they use a lot of WhatsApp to exchange information between themselves and to provide accessibility to digitally excluded students for learning purposes. They did receive at some point Google training for Google Classroom. And especially in the south, they already have that. In the northern part of Brazil, not. They did use Google Meet for synchronous classes, but this was more in the first semester of 2021. Just a quick reminder, which I forgot to mention, the pandemic started in March of 2020, and so until June of 2021, teachers were teaching remotely, okay? Some of them had used YouTube channels. In the northern part of the region, there were TV programs created by the state governments. There were printed textbooks and activities which were delivered to the students at the schools, and many times teachers had to go to schools and get these textbooks to correct them, and there was a lot of communication via email. So these are the main instructional material used in pedagogical practice. So teachers report using WhatsApp to practice pronunciation, textbooks and sheet of activities, and these are the student textbooks, student kits, Jamboard, YouTube videos, games, cartoons, comic strips, news articles, PDFs, feedback provided via email or Google's text editors. Synchronous meetings, interaction with students was limited to students responding using chat tools, more or less what's going to be happening here today. Students used email for doubts. One teacher produced his own instructional materials for history and geography lessons. So, for example, he used primary resources, fragment of existing text, maps, text from experts in the areas. And teachers reported replicating face-to-face pedagogical practices in the online environment, which is more or less to be expected, okay? So other challenges faced by teachers, well, there were no directives from the Ministry of Education at the beginning of the pandemic, so teachers were super lost. In 2020, teachers were required to go to the school. They were required to pick up the assignments, correct them at home. So this is before the asynchronous classes, which started to be offered only in 2021. In 2021, some state governments required use of Google Classroom, but not all teachers had previous experience with it. So some teacher education was provided, but teachers kind of had to learn by doing it, okay? Uh, Teachers also stated that there was work overload. They needed to upgrade their Wi-Fi, deal with family at home and noise, deal with students' cognitive loss, which became more apparent in 2021, and student evasion. They felt that there was a loss of bond. Student interaction and participation was a challenge, and they felt like they were exposing themselves in camera, and that was very new and challenging for them as well. Also, little time to produce instructional material, challenges for students. They need to learn how to use ICTs for learning purpose, despite being digital natives. And also, teachers had to learn how to deal with the digital exclusion, basically learning by doing due to lack of knowledge and skills with ICTs and remote teaching. Other challenges were lack of knowledge and skills of school director and pedagogical coordinator for ERT. So, as happens a lot, political aspects often dominate. Problems with distribution of printed material and resilient national curriculum, which was supposed to really go into effect in 2019, 2018, went into effect in 2020, and teachers did not receive any professional development to implement it. So that became a little problematic. Well, here is like the focus of my studies. So, did they really use OER? And I was quite surprised because in this small cohort group of 6, yes, they did use. So, one teacher stated that she developed an ebook. Teachers also stated they use repositories with material for history, with no clear indication of CC license. Use of books available on the internet, text and images in the public domain, use of OER to produce literature, Portuguese, Spanish, instructional materials. So this teacher who's already been using OER for some time. The teacher from the northern region, Brazil, developed a video and fruit cards from scratch for literacy. And I also asked them, well, what repositories were you resorting to? What license were you using? And I found out that it's still a challenge for teachers to use CC license and attribute them correctly. So, for example, one participant reported copying and pasting the CC logo, and other participants were not very clear on whether they were using the CC logo. And when I asked them about repositories, they said they were using repositories from universities and other educational institutions, some with the open license, but basically it's still a challenge for them. They say, oh, okay, they're using open license, open educational material, but really they're not putting licenses or attributing correctly, okay? Although they have stated that they've been using OER. 2 teachers said that they deposited the material in the Ministry of Education repository digital resources, but apparently got no feedback from them. So they were waiting for something which they didn't have. In terms of use of open educational practices, teachers reported using OEPs to share material for help, sharing of instructional material, images, and audio via WhatsApp or Facebook. Also, they use these platforms. Teachers joined specific subject groups to share materials. There was a lot of sharing of tools with colleagues. So basically, the teachers who had been already working with technology before shared these tools. One teacher reported difficulty sharing ideas and instructional material because there are no regular meetings held between teachers who teach the same subjects. And one participant said that there's a lack of culture of collaboration. Many teachers develop things and don't like to share them. And this is what happens basically face to face as well. Then I asked the participants how students were assessed for engagement and learning. And that's where I kind of like got, a question mark. And so they really had this difficulty in assessing students during synchronous classes. They didn't know who was participating because students were basically writing in the comments, classes were early, so they didn't get enough engagement there. And they also reported that students who did not use Google Classroom had a lower engagement rate, or one might suppose so. Some teachers said that they resorted to, well, actually one, project-based learning. She developed comic strips based on news, got students to interact more. There was collaborative and cooperative learning. So in this instance, development of avatars and cartoons. Other teachers stated that they tried to obtain regular student feedback on activities, but apparently 20% of the students appeared to not have engaged in any kind of remote learning, and participants reported that ERT exacerbated the existing digital exclusion, so it was difficult to assess engagement and learning of some of the students. So moving on here, the next question was, if these teachers who were interviewed plan to use OER and OEPs in face-to-face classes. And one teacher reported she's already began developing all classes using OER, which I thought was really nice to hear. Another teacher stated it's necessary to create OER because there's a lack of instructional material in the Amazon region. OER could cater better to students' needs, and I found that amazing, and totally said, yeah, go for it. And all participants plan to use OER in their face-to-face class. Remind you that they're all back now teaching face-to-face, so I'm going to kind of follow up on that. And there is need to disseminate OER use and open license use, and most plan to do this in their own schools. So these are basically, I'll go over, see how much time I have, but these are suggestions, lessons learned that I got from these participants, that professional development should be offered more consistently and with higher quality. It's not the first time I hear this. My doctor's thesis also, sorry, my doctor's, it's not the thesis. Well, anyway, my publication talks about this, about professional development. Teachers complained of salaries. They have not had salary raises since 2013. Public policies need to be revisited and changed. Lack of infrastructure in public schools, and still teachers still need to use their own computers and Wi-Fi. And this was an interesting time because when teachers went back to their face-to-face classes, before that, they couldn't use their mobile phones, and now they can. And so it's really interesting that they can now, because they found out that, wow, something opened up there. Teachers found that it's easier to work with students remotely than in schools because of lack of reliable access to the internet. Another interesting finding was that older teachers who are more resistant to technology, and my doctoral study talks about, are now better adapted. So some good came out of this pandemic. Students now know how to use email. Teachers are now more prepared to use digital resources and escape traditional classes by use of OER. Students need teachers' mediation to use digital resources. Well, they always did, but this became clear, and this is one of the suggestions. There is need to disseminate OER, OEPs, and provide incentives, not monetary, but rather in prize awards for those teachers who create or use them. And basically, politics hamper collaboration and co-creation efforts. So basically, now moving on to the phase 2 of my study, this is what I'm trying to do: recruiting more participants. I'll be validating preliminary findings with participants, member checking. So I plan to be holding an online workshop with them. I'll be adding concepts of open pedagogies and potential factors to catalyze a better path for the future and how collaborative work can support a different scope in the future. And hopefully, the product of this will be a framework and guidelines aimed at improving future educational practices focused on better coping with times of crisis, because we don't know if the pandemic will come back. They'll have to go back to emergency remote learning again. We hope not. But anyway, at least everybody's vaccinated. So thank you very much for your time. I've now ended my presentation and I'm open for any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much for that, Vivian. That was a great presentation. I have to say the chat has been buzzing, so I'll pop some questions up for you. One of them not a question, but some really good points made by AC Page OU. The first one being, unless guidance is provided with the CC item about how to attribute it, most people won't know how to do attribution properly.
Yes, that is totally correct. I just want to remind you that these teachers who I interviewed had been taught not only how to create what OER were, how to create OER, and so on and so forth. So, and how to attribute them, how to use the license. So they were taught all that. But then when they had to put this into practice, apparently they didn't do it correctly.
Yeah, and a follow-up point to that, we as open education practitioners need to consciously ensure we demonstrate by example how to attribute what we share openly to help people with attribution.
Definitely. I definitely agree with that. But as I saw, even though they were demonstrated by example how to do that, they still had problems doing that. So I guess they need more practice moving forward on how to do that.
So question, a question from Martin Weller. Teachers don't tend to use terms like OEP or OER. So I was wondering, for those that were engaging in this sort of practice already, what sort of phrases or terms did they use?
They didn't. Well, they weren't focusing on OER and OEP, but when I recruited them, Martin, I actually did. I knew that they had already taken this course on OER. Okay, so that was one of the criteria. Um, so they weren't really stuck on using any kind of phrase or terms. They were just describing the kinds of material that they were developing, which they were considering to be OER, and the kind of practices they were engaging in, which they considered to be OEP, okay? So, like sharing material, asking for help, and so on and so forth. Thanks
Great.
for that question, Martin.
Another point which I definitely agree with as well, and I'm sure lots will. EC Page OU says, a tiny silver lining to the pandemic, it forced people to try different ways to teach and learn.
Yes, and it was very exciting to learn that many of these teachers started taking this OER course, which was already been offering since 2017 for free during 2020, during the pandemic year. So, though the teachers said they had little time, they had time to go after and take these courses that were being offered online. So I think that's also one of the reasons why they ended up not attributing correctly, because some had just finished the course, and I think they still needed more practice and time to be able to do so correctly. So yes, the pandemic had a lot of upsides to it, and I think one of them was also that teachers who were kind of really against using ICTs in the classrooms are now finding them great. So they don't have all this resistance that they used to. So there is a silver lining to the pandemic for sure.
Great. Well, I'm just checking. I don't think we have any more questions. Just one more comment from Martin saying, I think it helps our OER comms to know the type of language commonly used. So thank you. So at this point, it's just left for me to say thank you so much. I would like to point out how early Vivian has joined us this morning from Brazil. Is it now 6 a.m.?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now it's 6:36 a.m.
So still very, very early. So thank you so much for coming to join us today at that time and to tell us about your work. It's been really interesting, and I'm sure the chat will agree that they have enjoyed it. And yeah, I will leave it there and see you all at the next session. Thank you so much, Vivian.
Okay, thank you, Caroline. Thank you for hosting me, and I'll be open to any available comments or questions that any of you have in the future. Thank you, and have a great conference the rest of the day.
Thank you.